Hey there, gearheads and tone chasers. Today we're jumping into the electrifying world of Mesa Boogie, the American-made amps that have been melting faces and capturing hearts for decades. Buckle up, because we're about to take a journey through time, tone, and pure rock and roll magic. Mesa Boogie, also known as Mesa Engineering, is an American company in Petaluma, California that manufactures amplifiers and other accessories for guitar and bass. It has been in operation since 1969. Randall Smith was born into a musical family in Berkeley, California in 1946. His mother and sister played piano, and his father was the first chair, clarinet, with the Oakland Symphony Orchestra. His father also played tenor sax and had a radio show. Smith believes all of his early musical experiences taught him how to hear tone. In the mid-1960s, Smith wanted to participate in the San Francisco music scene, having been taught clarinet and a little sax by his father, but instead he took up the drums. He played with the local blues and jam band and co-founded the band Martha's Laundry. While playing a gig, keyboardist Dave Kestner's amp failed, and after Smith successfully repaired it, and impressed Kestner, proposed opening a music store together with Smith as the repairman. They opened Prune Music in 1967, inside a building that had been a Chinese grocery store. Smith's clients included bands such as the Steve Miller Band, the Grateful Dead, and Jefferson Airplane. Mesa Boogie began with a practical joke when Smith was commissioned to secretly convert the 20-watt Fender Princeton of a local guitarist into a significantly louder 100-watt amp without altering its appearance. He accomplished this by replacing the amplifier section with that of a Fender Bassman and replacing the 10-inch speaker with a 12-inch speaker. To ensure the joke would work, Smith asked Carlos Santana, a customer at Prune Music, to demo the amp. Despite skepticism at the sight of the seemingly stock amp, Santana played it, was blown away, and exclaimed, "Man, that amp really boogies." In addition to the amp repair business, Smith supplemented his income by building concrete foundations for houses and rebuilding Mercedes-Benz automobile engines. Smith made up Mesa Engineering, an official-sounding name as the umbrella company for all of these efforts, purchasing concrete by the truckload for house projects, as well as wholesale parts for amps and car engines. In the 1970s, Smith was building a preamplifier for Lee Michaels, who needed a preamp to drive his new Crown DC 300 power amplifiers. Smith added an extra tube gain stage to the preamp with 3 variable gain controls at different points in the circuit, in what is now called a cascaded design. The amount of gain produced surprised both, and Smith combined the cascaded design with the small form factor of the Fender Princeton, creating the first high-gain amp, the Princeton Boogie. Released in 1972, the Boogie solved the issue of amps not having enough gain to sustain notes at volumes suitable for smaller venues. An early customer, Carlos Santana, took a snakeskin-covered model to a jam session with Bob Dylan and the Rolling Stones at Madison Square Garden. Joining the Stones on stage for an encore of Symphony for the Devil, Santana's guitar tone turned the band into fans of the Boogie, and the Stones' next tour exclusively featured Boogie amps. As the demand for his amps grew, Smith decided to move his workshop out of the Prune Music storefront to get away from all the distractions. He relocated to what was formerly a dog kennel, then eventually to his home. Smith produced a number of custom variations of the Boogie through the late 70s, with options including reverb, a 5-band EQ, various speakers, most often Altec or Electro Voice, wood-jointed cabinets, and wicker grills. Upon the 1978 release of the Boogie's successor, the Mark II, the Boogie was renamed the Mark I. Smith ultimately produced over 3,000 amps out of his home workshop in the 1970s. As Mesa continued to grow, Smith moved the company to Petaluma, California in 1980. and continued to improve his amp designs to meet guitar players' requests. Revisions to the Mark II resulted in amplifier milestones such as channel switching and the first effects loop. The Mark II-C was introduced in 1983 to fix a noticeable pop when switching channels, while subsequent improvements to the effects loop resulted in a handwritten plus designation on the rear of each amplifier chassis. Notably, this new 2C Plus variant also featured an altered preamp to create a more aggressive sound with a strong mid-range focus and tight low end. Combined with its graphic EQ, the amp excelled at soaring lead sounds and huge crunch chords. Early adopters included heavy metal guitarists like Metallica's Kirk Hammett and James Hetfield, who was dissatisfied with Marshall amps at the time and wanted something percussive, tight, and in your face. Guitar World cited the 2C Plus's use on Master of Puppets as the primary reason for its holy grail status in the rock and metal genres, while noting the amp was also a favorite of top session musicians at the time like Steve Lukather. As the Mark III was already deep in development, fewer than 3,000 2C Plus amps were made during its short production run between January of 1984 and March of 1985. Additionally, some players had Mark II models modified to the 2C Plus specs. The 2C Plus is Mesa Boogie's most valuable amp on the secondary market, with models often selling for over $15,000. Throughout the decade, Mesa continued to produce combo and head amplifiers and began production of rack power and preamps, developing power amplifiers such as the M180, 190, and Strategy series, as well as preamps such as the Quad and Studio. Other models developed in the 1980s included the Mark III, Mark IV, the Son of Boogie, and the Studio 22. As the 1980s came to a close, the complicated features and boutique styling of the Mark series began losing popularity in favor of simpler designs by Marshall, Bogner, and Soldano. Particularly inspired by Soldano's SLO 100 itself, which was derived from the Mark series circuits, Mesa introduced the dual rectifier in 1991. With a raw, aggressive, bass-heavy sound and sporting a characteristic steel diamond faceplate, the rectifier was Mesa's take on a big monster metal head and intended to look threatening compared to the Mark amps. The rectifier became immensely popular among heavier styles of rock, nu metal, as well as hard rock, post-grunge, and punk. While an array of bands have used rectifiers, including Korn, Tool, Soundgarden, Foo Fighters, and Blink-182, Smith stated that the overwhelming success of the amp with its distinctive sound and styling has led many people to associate the entire Mesa brand exclusively with metal. Despite the company's roots in the Fender legacy and its initial reputation as a hippie outfit aimed at blues-based players, Mesa continued to revise the design of the rectifiers as the decade went on, with revisions F and G having a darker, looser sound that extended the model's popularity into the 2000s. Mesa followed up the success of the rectifiers with the short-lived Maverick and Blue Angel models, as well as the Nomads. Mesa has continued to introduce new models in the 2000s and 2010s with models such as the Road King 2, the Lone Star and Lone Star Special, the Stiletto, and Express lines, along with the lower watt versions of the larger amps, such as the Mini Rectifier and the Mark V 25 and the Mark V 35. And don't forget the Triple Rectifier. On January 6th, 2021, it was announced that Gibson had acquired Mesa Boogie. As a result of the acquisition, Smith joined Gibson as master designer and pioneer of Mesa Boogie and beyond. If you like this video, don't forget to check out these videos on Soldano, Orange, Marshall, and Fender. I want to thank everybody for joining me on this fascinating journey through the history of Mesa Boogie. Don't forget to like and subscribe. This has been Damon D. One World, One Rock.